right, I think we're ready for Arnold.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Um, I'm going to try to jump right in. I've enjoyed so far. Um, so there's my question. My topic was about the achievement gap, basically, and how just due to my previous involvement, first of all, just being exposed to that gap firsthand early on in my teaching career, and also being involved in a nonprofit organization some years ago that offered some community services. I was just interested. I believe in this, and I was interested to see if the data backed up um, my hypothesis, basically that community programs either connected to the school or just outside of the school itself could address the gaps that come from, they start as socioeconomic gaps and then they become achievement gaps and get perpetuated, throughout the decades in our country. So that's what my question is about. And I have a bunch of data for us to look at if I can. There we go. So as I said, I had experience with the gap and even had, personal experience with some students my second year of teaching, but I just wanted to establish with data or with people that have actually been doing the research that there is a gap. So my first few slides, maybe my first 5 or 6 slides, just look at the gap from different perspectives. So I know it's a lot of words, but I tried to highlight. So this is the gap in academic development. So it starts at a very, very early age. This first bullet is dealing with the age of 3. You can see differences in the vocabulary of students that are disadvantaged socioeconomically. By 4th grade, we see gaps in their reading and math levels, already 2 years behind their classmates who are, white and wealthy. And then by the end of high school, the gap is broadened even more. So they're 4 years behind where socioeconomically disadvantaged Black and Hispanic students are in 12th grade is where their white peers are in 8th grade. So that's definitely a gap. The gap in the experience. So African-American students 3 times more likely to be classified as special education students. That's from a young age. There's a gap in the percentage of students that from different races getting their GEDs and high school diplomas, and the higher percentage of the minority students get GEDs, but the overall percentage is lower. So you can see that those highlights in that second bullet. And then by the age of 29, so we can see how it just builds from starting at the age of 3 and how the gap just continues to widen as students get older and become adults. By the age of 29, Black students are half as likely as white students to have earned a bachelor's degree. So all of that data came from the Teachers College at the at Columbia University. And this slide deals with the gap in the quality of life. So that's some gaps in the vision and the medical benefits of poor children. I'm trying to expedite through the gap slides, but these you can visually see the gaps. So the people that did the research nationally, they did it by state. This is the Hispanic and white gap. Here we have grades 4 and grade 8 at the bottom. And you can see the gap expanded and then closed a little, but there's still a significant gap there. That's the graphs on the left deal with the national gap. I included Florida, first of all, because Louisiana, I was going to include Florida and Louisiana, but our Hispanic population in Louisiana is not significant enough for us to be able to measure the gap. So it looks like there is no gap, but it's because we're like 3 or 4% Hispanic. But you can see from between 1992 and 2009, the Hispanic population in Florida more than doubled. And I think this slide shows a good trend that the gap is closing in Florida. So that's a positive there. So here we see the same thing happening with reading scores. Again, fourth and eighth grade, and we see that the gap is closing in Florida. This slide specifically is still the Hispanic and white gap, but it's specifically dealing with students eligible for the National School Lunch Program. So that's the indicator of, and the free reduced lunch is an indicator of the socioeconomic status, obviously. And we can see there's a gap, a racial gap, whether the students are eligible or not, but consistently the bar for the line for the eligible students who do receive free and reduced lunch is lower than the achievement for those who do not. So again, establishing that the gap is real. This is the visual aid for the Black-white gap. So all of those slides were for the Hispanic-white gap. This is for the Black-white gap. And the graph on the left, if you just pay attention to the middle bar. So you got the small green bars to the far left and far right of each bar, but that middle portion shows the gap. And this is a gap in just the percentage of Black students attending schools. So like examining this data really kind of reveals that we still have a kind of separate but equal approach. And I know this says 2011, but it was over several years that they and the figures showed that this was updated in 2015 actually. This on the right shows the green gap in the middle shows the achievement gap for Black and white students within the same school. So on the far right is between different schools, and that gap is not as high, but the gap for Black and white students within the same school is very wide. And you could find different states and examine that data. But all of that was to establish that there is a gap, and all the details of that data reveal that it could require a very nuanced approach. But again, the hypothesis was that if we just get the whole community involved and try to meet the needs of the socioeconomic gaps, then we could close the achievement gap. So I have like 2 case studies that I just want to show you that, data has been collected to show that this gap can be closed through community-based efforts. So the first one is it happened in Redwood City, and this is in California near San Francisco. Some politicians got together and decided that they wanted to do something about the achievement gap, the obvious disparity that they saw from, it's a small area, but there's a large gap in economics as far as the families that were populating these schools. So they put together 4 family resource centers to serve the economically disadvantaged students that were in the same schools as the wealthy students. And this slide, so they do the research, they found gains in math, they found gains in reading, but because those gains weren't statistically significant, they didn't really, report them as gains. They didn't make a graph to show the differences because they weren't significant enough. But there is a significant difference here in English language learners. So that's what this graph shows, along with the table on the left showing some of the services that they offered. So that was the first of the 2 case studies. That was in Redwood City, California, near San Francisco. This other one is in Baltimore, Maryland. It was called Elevate. So this is a community-based initiative that basically provides these four services in these four main areas. And you can see those areas at the bottom, but out of school time is basically, tutoring, after school tutoring and homework help, whatever students might need, healthcare services, services for the economic support services for the family, and then just any activities to get the parents and the community engaged, like fun activities. And if you're a graph nerd, then you'll like the next few slides. So everywhere you see a star, that means there was a statistically significant difference. And it's showing how many standard deviations above the white wealthy students, or the students who didn't participate in the services, how much better the students who did participate in the services showed their achievement on this the test at the end of the year. So the OST, that's the tutoring. The SBHC, those are the health care services, and the FS, those are the family services. So this graph just shows, as it regards attendance, you see a bunch of stars everywhere, except the people who only did the healthcare services, everybody's attendance improved in a significant way. So just getting the kids to school through these community services, somebody else did a presentation earlier talking about truancy. Just getting them there is the first step in closing the gap, just changing their attitude about school. So you see a bunch of stars on that slide. Here's the reading gap, and you see the stars. You see the bars going above the mean there, and the reading gap was only closed by doing the hard work of having academic services, whether it was teachers or whoever it was that was offering this tutoring or this one-on-one help. That was the thing that helped close the reading gap the most. And the other services helped a little, but not as much as those academic services. The same thing is true for the math gap. Academic supports made the biggest difference and the only statistically significant difference. And with GPA, you still see stars everywhere you see OST. OST is, again, the out of school tutoring services. So even if it was just that, or it was the OST combined with the healthcare services, you got the statistically significant improvements in GPA. And they also examine suspension rates. Again, everywhere we see OST, we see a significant decrease in the suspension rates. So there's not much data out there, but I thought this study did a good job of looking at a lot of different indicators and being honest about whether the improvements really showed us a significant difference, a significant effect. So I think the recommendations are obvious, and there might be, bias coming from a teacher, but the thing that made the most impact was good old-fashioned tutoring and academic supports, making kids feel empowered about what they're learning and not, leaving them behind just because they start off behind. And where schools can't do it, or a teacher with 25 or 30 kids in the class can't do it, the community service or community centers or whatever the approach might be for that particular school district. I think we all school districts, and we just talked about how complicated that would be in New Orleans, but every region, I believe, should have these centers that can provide these services to help close the gap that is so glaring, as we saw through the first few slides that we looked at. And I think, until we address that, it's just going to be perpetuated generation after generation. But as I said, the hard work of one-on-one, getting in there and providing the academic services that students need show that, that makes the biggest difference. So that's all I have. Any questions? I think I got a lot of chats to read there. I think.
Go ahead, Marge.
Marjorie.
Yeah, we talk a lot about closing the achievement gap. We've been talking about it for, I'm just going to say decades. And we haven't found a magic bullet yet, but the information that you have there is really, it's fascinating. And it really points to the need for more community schools too. But my question is, and maybe you had this, I missed it. Do you have information on the achievement gap in New Orleans?
Not in a way that's, there's not much research being done. And I didn't find local data as much as I found state data.
Mm-hmm.
So that one slide that showed the black-white, share my screen again, that showed the black-white. And I just think that graph isn't as easy to interpret as the rest of them. But the Louisiana gap is difference of 19% in that whatever the National Assessment of Educational Progress, mm-hmm. the test that they gave. So for Louisiana, yes, I'm sorry, it's 14%. The 19% was with Florida.